Welcome back to Taoism Explained. This time we are jumping into chapter 34, which is called The Task of Achievement, Trust in its Perfection, or The Perfection of Trust. The first translation is as follows. All-pervading is the great Tao. It may be found on the left hand and on the right. All things depend on it for their production, which it gives to them, not one refusing obedience to it. When its work is accomplished, it does not claim the name of having done it. It clothes all things as with a garment, and makes no assumption of being their lord. It may be named in the smallest things. All things return to their root and disappear, and do not know that it is it which presides over their doing so. It may be named in the greatest things. Hence the sage is able, in the same way, to accomplish his great achievements. It is through his not making himself great that he can accomplish them. The next translation. How all-pervading is the great reason. It can be on the left and it can be on the right. The 10,000 things depend upon it for their life, and it refuses them not. When its merit is accomplished, it assumes not the name. Lovingly it nourishes the 10,000 things, and plays not the Lord. Ever desireless, it can be classed with the small. The 10,000 things return home to it. It plays not the Lord. It can be classed with the great. Therefore the holy man unto death does not make himself great, and can thus accomplish his greatness. And the last translation. Great Tao is all-pervading. It can be on both the right hand and the left. Everything relies upon it for their existence, and it does not fail them. It acquires merit, but covets not the title. It lovingly nourishes everything, but does not claim the rights of ownership. It has no desires. It can be classed with the small. Everything returns to it, yet it does not claim the right of ownership. It can be classed with the great. Therefore the wise man, to the end, will not pose as a great man, and by so doing will express his true greatness. This is one of my favorite chapters, so my thoughts might ramble on a bit more than usual this time. The Tao penetrates all, both to the left and to the right, and the world of things relies on it for their existence. This is a strange thing, especially to those of us brought up in the Western world, where the Christian religion reigns supreme, and where we take a very mechanistic view of the universe as a whole. When we think of the Tao, without saying too much, which is very difficult, we might think of the processes of nature at the highest level of order. Down here on Earth, ecosystems play their parts on the planetary scale. The so-called systems like the nervous system, skeletal system, and so on, commingle inside of your body. But when you put them all together, they are you in some sense, not really separate systems. In just the same way, if you take all of the systems, all the way up to nebulas, galaxies, clusters, and superclusters of galaxies, the thing that all of these smaller parts are wiggling around, dancing, working, or whatever, that is the Tao, the way of things. The very process itself which animates everything from the top and from the bottom. When things inside the world perish, they return to nature, but this nature is not their God in the sense of the word as we may know it. In our traditions, we think of God the Father as the creator of the universe from nothingness. We think of, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. And this has caused us to believe, maybe even in a literal sense, that the universe itself was created by a higher being that exists outside of space and time as we know it, outside of the visible universe. On the contrary, the Tao doesn't create anything or govern over anything. Certainly the Tao doesn't grandstand and brag about how it did such a good job at creating the world of things, demanding worship. The Tao ought not to be described as something that is even separate from ourselves or separate from nature at all, because the Tao itself is the way that we and nature flow. So to get back to what I was saying about the different systems here on Earth, the Tao, in my view, would be more along the lines of the entirety of all systems of interrelated pieces. You can't be you without the environment that you're currently in. And in the same way, the ocean wouldn't be what it is without oysters to filter out the water. And all of these seemingly disconnected parts of the entirety of nature arose together. All polar opposites must exist together in order to exist in the first place. You can't have back without front or wet without dry. With all of that, we can begin to see the world in a different sort of light, as a self-regulating, decentralized sort of superorganism. And this superorganism has been chopped up and labeled endlessly, from land masses to plants and animals, and even deep inside of the animals too. And while there is some utility in demarcating reality so that we can learn about it and talk about it and make discoveries, it would appear that we have long forgotten the totality which we have tried so hard to understand, and in the process cut ourselves off from it to such an extent that we don't even know that we are indeed intimately connected to it in each and every moment. A kind of funny thing that made me think of this chapter recently was a car that drove past me while I was sitting outside taking a break. The license plate was a custom lettering that said Playboy. Well, if you actually were a Playboy, would you really need to go to those lengths to tell the rest of the world about it? I think in just the same way, we're being told in the final lines that a truly great person does not want all of the accolades and praise that come along with their deeds. This is true of the Tao itself, and also on an individual level when it comes to virtue or ethics and morality, or whatever you want to call it. So, when you make a charitable contribution, for example, you may do so anonymously rather than attaching your name to it for the brownie points. This applies to all aspects of life, really. You do the extra things that other people maybe don't want to do, and rather than letting everyone know that you're such a good boy for doing so and so when nobody asked you to, you just perform your deeds and go on with your life normally.